I'm sitting in this hospital bed watching my son divide up my jewelry through the crack in the door. My daughter-in-law is holding my grandmother's pearl necklace up to the light, the one I promised would go to my granddaughter when she turned 18. Emma is only 12. The pearls catch the fluorescent hospital lighting, and Cheryl's eyes gleam with the same cold shine. This one's worth at least $3,000, she whispers to my son, turning the clasp over in her manicured fingers. Maybe more. We should get it appraised before anyone notices it's missing. My son, my firstborn, the boy I held through countless fevers and nightmares, the child I rocked to sleep singing lullabies until my voice was hoarse, just nods like we're discussing the weather. Good thinking, Michael says, his voice carrying the same tone he uses when discussing quarterly reports at his office. What about the ring? They think I'm dying. They think I can't hear them. They think I don't know. The morphine drip isn't even connected. I asked the nurse to help me 20 minutes ago and told her I needed to see something. Needed to know something for certain. Patricia understood without me having to explain the whole sordid truth. Sometimes women of a certain age just know when another woman needs to see the world clearly, even when the clarity might destroy her. I watch my daughter walk through the doorway now, the one I sacrificed my figure, my career, my dreams for. Sarah goes straight to my purse on the bedside table, starts counting the cash in my wallet with the efficiency of a bank teller. $43.16. I know because I counted it this morning, the way elderly people do when every dollar matters. Mom always keeps emergency money in her bedroom, she tells her brother, not bothering to lower her voice. Hidden in that old jewelry box on her dresser. We should check there tonight before someone else thinks to look. Tonight. While they think I'm unconscious and dying. While they imagine I'm taking my final breaths, they're planning to rifle through my most private possessions like vultures picking at roadkill. I close my eyes and let my breathing get shallow the way the movies taught me. My daughter comes closer, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor with sharp, impatient taps. For just 1 second I think she might lean down and kiss my forehead. Might whisper that she loves me, that she's sorry for all the time she was too busy, too stressed, too important to call her mother back. Instead she checks my pulse with clinical detachment and walks away. 67 years old, and I'm learning what I'm really worth to the people I gave my whole life to. Not much apparently. Less than grandmother's pearls. Less than whatever cash they can find in my bedroom. Less than the inconvenience of pretending to grieve. The plan came to me like lightning strikes come to tall trees. Sharp and sudden and absolutely inevitable. If they wanted me dead so badly, if they were already planning my funeral and dividing my possessions like some morbid estate sale, well, maybe it was time to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. But I was going to make sure I got a front row seat to see who they really were when they thought I was gone forever. Because the dead see everything. And remember everything. And sometimes they come back to tell the truth. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Margaret Rose Williams Morrison, and I need you to understand something about women my age before I tell you how I came to fake my own death to expose my family's true nature. We remember when handshakes meant something. When a man's word was his bond and a woman's love was considered sacred. When family dinner happened every Sunday without exception, no matter what sporting event was on television or what social obligation beckoned. When you took care of your own and your own took care of you until death did you part. I have lines around my eyes that map out 67 years of laughter and worry, joy and heartbreak. These wrinkles formed from squinting into the sun while watching Little League games, from crying over skinned knees and broken hearts, from smiling so hard at Christmas mornings that my cheeks ached for hours afterward. My hands are spotted with age spots that appeared gradually like freckles in reverse, but they're still strong. These hands changed 10,000 diapers, packed countless school lunches, worked double shifts when money was tight, and held dying parents through their final breaths. These hands built a life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I remember dancing to Madonna in my kitchen in 1985, 8 months pregnant with my youngest, feeling like the future was this bright, shining thing waiting for us all. The song was Like a Virgin, and I felt so scandalous, so alive, so certain that the world was getting better and that my children would inherit something beautiful. I remember when cell phones were the size of bricks and cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. We laughed about them, certain they'd never catch on. Who would want to be reached everywhere they went? How naive we were. How beautifully, tragically naive. I remember when families actually talked to each other. When dinner time meant sitting around a table sharing stories about our days, arguing about politics and laughing about nothing at all. When quality time wasn't a scheduled appointment but simply the natural result of living in the same house and genuinely liking each other's company. The house I'm lying in right now, well, pretending to lie dying in, Richard and I bought 42 years ago for $23,000. It felt like all the money in the world back then. We painted every room ourselves, working weekends and evenings, choosing colors that would make our children feel safe and loved. We planted the oak tree in the front yard when Michael was 3, watching him pat the soil with his tiny hands while promising the sapling that he'd climb it when it got bigger. He never did climb that tree. It grew tall and strong, but Michael grew busy and distant. Now it shades a house where love went to die. Richard and I built the deck where our children took their first steps, learned to ride bicycles, and had their first kisses under porch lights that we installed with our own hands. Every board, every nail, every loving detail was chosen with the future in mind. With the certainty that this house would be filled with grandchildren and holiday gatherings and the comfortable chaos of a family that genuinely enjoyed being together. We were so sure about the future. So certain that love, once planted, would grow as surely as that oak tree. We never imagined that children could become strangers. That strangers could become predators. That the people you die for might be waiting for you to do exactly that. Let me tell you about the family I built, brick by loving brick, the one I thought would catch me when I inevitably fell. Michael Richard Morrison was my first. Born after 18 brutal hours of labor on a Tuesday in October 1976, screaming like he was personally offended by the audacity of being born. The doctor said he was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that could wake the dead. But from the moment I held him, I knew he was different. Not in a medical way, but in something deeper. Something harder to define. He was the kind of baby who needed constant attention, who wouldn't sleep unless I was holding him, walking with him, singing to him. Richard used to joke that Michael had trained me to be his personal servant from day one, and I'd laugh because it seemed cute then. Endearing. A sign of how much he loved his mama. I should have seen the warning signs. I should have recognized manipulation even in an infant. But when you're holding your firstborn, when you're drowning in hormones and love and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny person alive, you don't think about warning signs. You think about love. You think about forever. You think about building something beautiful together. Michael was smart, too smart maybe. He figured out early that tears got him what he wanted faster than please and thank you. He discovered that if he cried long enough, loud enough, dramatically enough, adults would give him anything just to make the noise stop. I remember when he was 7, he broke Sarah's favorite doll during one of his tantrums over bedtime. When she started crying over her broken toy, he immediately began sobbing louder, throwing himself on the floor with theatrical despair. And somehow, impossibly, I found myself comforting him instead of her. Pattern established. Blueprint created. The rest of our lives mapped out in that single moment. Sarah Elizabeth came 3 years later, quiet where Michael was loud, gentle where he was demanding. She was my sweetheart, my helper, the one who wanted to cook with mommy and learn to sew and have tea parties with her dolls. She'd follow me around the house, chattering about everything and nothing, making me feel like the most important person in her tiny universe. But even then, even in her sweetness, I could see her watching Michael. Bernie. Studying. Seeing how tears and manipulation got results, how the squeaky wheel got the grease, how being difficult was often more effective than being good. Children are such quick learners. Especially when the lessons involve getting what they want. The early years were golden though. Picture perfect in the way that family photos from the 70s and 80s always look, slightly faded, everyone dressed in coordinating outfits, smiles that seemed genuine because they were. Richard worked construction, his hands always stained with honest dirt and calluses. I worked part-time at First National Bank, counting other people's money and dreaming about our own future prosperity. We had barbecues in the backyard every summer weekend, the kind where neighbors wandered over with their own lawn chairs and children played until the streetlights came on. We took family vacations to cheap motels with kidney-shaped pools and continental breakfasts that felt luxurious because we were together. Christmas mornings felt like magic. Not because of the presents, though we managed to provide plenty, but because of the anticipation, the joy, the sense that we were the luckiest family in the world. I made Halloween costumes from scratch, staying up until midnight the night before, sewing sequins onto fairy wings and painting cardboard shields silver. I never missed a school play even when it meant taking unpaid time off work. I knew all their friends' names, their parents' names, their pets' names. I knew who was struggling with math and who had a crush on whom and who needed extra encouragement to try out for the soccer team. I thought I was building something beautiful. I thought I was creating a foundation that would last forever. I thought love was enough. When the kids hit their teenage years, things shifted like tectonic plates, slowly at first, then all at once. Michael discovered that guilt was even more effective than tears. He'd disappear for hours without telling us where he was going, come home smelling like cigarettes and defiance, then tell me I didn't trust him when I asked questions. That I was suffocating him. That other mothers weren't so controlling, so paranoid, so desperate for information about their children's lives. "You don't understand me," became his battle cry. "You never listen to what I'm actually saying." But I was listening. I was listening so hard it felt like my ears might bleed. I just didn't like what I was hearing. Sarah learned to be sneaky instead of dramatic. Sweet to my face but rolling her eyes the moment she thought I wasn't looking. She'd agree to family plans with enthusiasm, then suddenly remember a friend's crisis that needed her immediate attention just as we were walking out the door. She developed selective hearing for chores and selective memory for promises. But they were teenagers. This was normal, right? This was just adolescence, not a fundamental shift in their character. They'd come back to us when they were older. Wouldn't they? I made excuses for behavior that would have gotten me grounded for a month when I was their age. I told myself that times were different, that teenagers had more pressures now, that being a parent meant adapting to your children's needs rather than expecting them to adapt to your values. I told myself a lot of lies during those years. Most of them were designed to protect me from the truth that was growing more obvious every day. My children were becoming people I didn't recognize. People I didn't particularly like. College years brought a brief reprieve, like the eye of a hurricane passing over our family. Distance made them appreciative again, or at least it made them good at pretending to be appreciative. Michael called home every Sunday, asking for care packages filled with homemade cookies and asking for advice about girls and classes and whether he should declare a business major or stick with communications. Sarah sent me pictures from sorority events, told me about her professors, seemed genuinely happy to see me during holiday visits. She'd curl up next to me on the couch like she had when she was little, sharing gossip about her roommates and asking me to teach her how to make my famous apple pie. I thought we'd made it through the storm. I thought the difficult years were behind us. I thought we'd found our way back to each other. But what I didn't realize was that they'd learned to perform love rather than feel it. They'd discovered that a little affection went a long way toward ensuring continued financial support. They'd figured out that calling me Mom, with just the right amount of warmth, would keep the care packages and tuition payments coming. Then came real adulthood. Careers and marriages and mortgages and children of their own. The time when I expected to transition from being their primary source of support to being their honored elder, the matriarch they'd turn to for wisdom and comfort and the kind of unconditional love that only mothers can provide. Instead, I became a problem to be managed. An obligation to be minimized. A burden to be endured. Michael married Cheryl when he was 26, a woman who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. She was polite but distant from the beginning, the kind of daughter-in-law who called me Mrs. Morrison instead of Mom even after 10 years of marriage. She had opinions about everything: how I cooked, too much butter; how I kept house, too much clutter; how I spent my money, too frivolously; how I parented my grandchildren, too permissively. "Michael says you're thinking about remodeling the kitchen," she'd mentioned during family dinners, her voice carrying the particular tone that women use when they're about to say something cutting while maintaining plausible deniability. "That seems awfully expensive for someone on a fixed income." Fixed income. Like Richard's pension and my Social Security made me some kind of charity case. Like the money we'd saved through 40 years of sacrifice was somehow insufficient for basic home maintenance. Like I needed her permission to spend my own money on my own house. The first real incident happened 2 months after Richard's funeral, on a Tuesday that started ordinary and ended with me understanding exactly how alone I really was. I'd been feeling dizzy all morning. Nothing dramatic, just a persistent lightheadedness that made me nervous about driving to the grocery store. At my age, you don't ignore things like dizziness. Too many of my friends had fallen, broken hips, spent their final years in nursing homes because they'd dismissed warning signs as normal aging. So I did what I thought any reasonable person would do. I called my son. "Michael, honey, I'm feeling a little unsteady today. Could you maybe swing by the store for me? I just need a few things. The silence stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Mom, he said finally, and I could hear typing in the background, the click 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 of someone multitasking through a conversation with their elderly mother. I'm at work. It's the middle of the afternoon. Can't this wait until the weekend? Well, I suppose it could, but I don't have much food in the house, and if I'm feeling dizzy. Look, he interrupted, the typing getting faster, more aggressive. If you're really having medical issues, you should call your doctor. Or 911. I can't drop everything every time you feel a little under the weather. Every time. Like I was constantly calling him for frivolous emergencies. Like I was the boy who cried wolf, except I was a woman who cried for basic human connection. I'm not asking you to drop everything, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. I just thought maybe on your way home. Mom, I live 25 minutes away from you. It's not on my way anywhere. And honestly, maybe this is a sign that you need to think about grocery delivery services. Or moving somewhere more manageable. Somewhere more manageable. Like an assisted living facility. Like a place where I wouldn't be his problem anymore. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at the empty refrigerator and feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not the dizziness from earlier. This was different. This was the chill of realization, of understanding that the child I'd carried for 9 months, labored to bring into this world, raised with every ounce of love I possessed, now viewed my basic needs as inconveniences to be solved rather than opportunities to show care. I called Sarah next, got her voicemail, waited an hour, tried again. Mom, what's the emergency? She answered on the 5th ring, sounding breathless and annoyed. I'm feeling dizzy and wondered if you could. Are you bleeding? Are any bones broken? Are you having chest pains? No, but... Then why didn't you just call the pharmacy? They deliver now, you know. Mom, I can't leave work every time you have a minor issue. I have deadlines and responsibilities. Minor issue. Like my safety, my health, my basic survival needs were minor issues in the grand scheme of her important life. I wasn't asking you to leave work, I said. I just thought after work maybe. I have yoga tonight. And David's parents are coming for dinner tomorrow, so I need to clean the house and plan a menu. This week is completely insane. Yoga. Dinner with the in-laws. House cleaning. All more important than making sure their mother had food in her refrigerator. I hung up and did what independent women of my generation always do. I solved the problem myself. I took 3 aspirin, waited for the dizziness to subside, and drove very carefully to the grocery store, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline and promising myself I wouldn't need to ask for help again. That was my first mistake. Promising myself I wouldn't be a burden. Instead of recognizing that love should make helping feel like privilege, not burden. The second incident was worse because it revealed not just their reluctance to help, but their active annoyance at being needed. I'd been having chest pains for a week, sharp, irregular pangs that came and went without warning. At my age, with my family history of heart disease, you don't take chances with chest pains. My father died of a heart attack at 71. My mother had bypass surgery at 68. I called my doctor, scheduled an appointment for the next morning, then did what I thought any loving child would want. I called to let them know what was happening. Chest pains. Michael repeated when I explained the situation. For just a moment I heard something in his voice that sounded like concern. Mom, that could be serious. You should probably go to the emergency room right now. Relief flooded through me like warm water. He did care. He was worried about me. This was what I'd been hoping for. Evidence that underneath all the busyness and distance, my son still loved his mother enough to be frightened when she might be in danger. Actually, he continued after a pause, on second thought, let's not panic here. You've been under a lot of stress since Dad died. It's probably anxiety. Just take some deep breaths and try to relax. See how you feel in the morning. Take some deep breaths. For potential heart problems. From someone who'd never been to medical school. From someone whose medical expertise came from watching Grey's Anatomy. But Michael, what if it's actually... Mom, you can't run to the doctor every time you feel anxious. It's expensive and honestly you're going to end up with a reputation as a hypochondriac. Doctors don't like patients who cry wolf all the time. Cry wolf. For reporting symptoms that could indicate a heart attack. For taking my health seriously when my own children wouldn't. I'm not crying wolf, I said, feeling tears start behind my eyes. I'm scared. I don't know what these pains mean and I thought you'd want to know. Of course I want to know if something's really wrong, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. I just think you need to consider whether every little ache and pain requires medical intervention. Dad handled things stoically. Maybe you could try that approach. Dad handled things stoically. Translation: Dad suffered in silence and died of cancer. Maybe I should follow his example. Maybe I should stop bothering people with my inconvenient desire to stay alive. I went to the appointment alone the next day, sat in the waiting room surrounded by other elderly people who looked as scared and isolated as I felt. The doctor ran tests, EKG, blood work, stress test. Everything came back normal. Probably stress and grief, just like Michael had diagnosed from 25 miles away. But as I drove home with my clean bill of health, I realized that the worst part wasn't the medical scare. It was sitting in that doctor's office, giving emergency contact information, and realizing I wasn't sure either of my children would answer if the hospital called. I called both of them that evening to report the good news. Michael answered on the fourth ring, clearly distracted. Sarah sent me to voicemail. Neither called back to ask for details. Neither seemed relieved that their mother wasn't dying. Neither apologized for dismissing my concerns. The third incident shattered something in me that I didn't know could be shattered: my faith in the myth of family loyalty. I'd fallen in the shower 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, a stupid slip that left me with a bruised tailbone and a sprained wrist. Nothing serious, but enough to make me nervous about living alone. Enough to make me realize how quickly independence could disappear, how easily a simple accident could become a tragedy when there's no one around to help. I called Michael first, explained what had happened, asked if he could come over just to check that I was okay. To make sure I hadn't missed any serious injuries. To help me feel less frightened and alone. Mom, I can't leave work for something like this. If you were seriously injured, you would have called 911, right? So obviously you're fine. Obviously you're fine. Because people who aren't fine don't call their children for comfort. Because needing reassurance is the same as being dramatic. Because wanting your family when you're scared and hurt is unreasonable. I am fine, I said carefully. I just thought you might want to. Want what? Hold your hand. Mom, you're a grown woman. You handled raising 2 children. You can handle a bruised butt. A bruised butt. That's how he characterized his mother's injury. That's how much respect he had for my pain. I tried Sarah next, hoping for a different response. Hoping for the daughter I'd raised to be nurturing and compassionate. Oh no, Mom. Are you okay? That sounds scary. For a moment my heart lifted. This was better. This was the reaction I'd been hoping for. I'm mostly okay, I said. Just shaken up. I was wondering if you could maybe stop by after work just to... Actually, I can't tonight. It's a book club and I'm hosting. But I could swing by tomorrow afternoon for a few minutes. A few minutes. To check on her injured mother. Between more important social obligations. Tomorrow afternoon would be... Oh wait, tomorrow is parent-teacher conferences for Emma. And Thursday is yoga. Maybe Friday? No, Friday is girls' night out. Could this wait until the weekend? Could my injury wait until the weekend? Could my fear wait until it was convenient for her? Could my need for comfort be scheduled around her social calendar? I told her not to worry about it. That I was fine. That I didn't need anything. I was becoming very good at lying about not needing anything. Very good at pretending I was fine when I was falling apart. Very good at protecting my children from the inconvenience of having a mother who was getting older and more fragile. But the worst part came later that week, when I happened to run into Sarah's neighbor at the grocery store. Oh, Margaret, she said, all smiles and casual concern. Sarah told me about your fall. She said you were being so dramatic about it, calling everyone and demanding attention. She's worried you're becoming one of those elderly people who manufacture crises for sympathy. Dramatic. Demanding attention. Manufacturing crises. That's how my daughter described her mother's injury to the neighbors. That's how she characterized my phone call asking for help. I was becoming a cautionary tale she shared at cocktail parties. An embarrassing example of how pathetic old people could become. I finished my shopping in a daze, went home and sat in my kitchen staring at the wall for 2 hours. Not thinking exactly. Just processing. Just letting the truth settle into my bones like cold seeping through inadequate clothing. My children didn't see me as a person anymore. They saw me as a problem. A collection of needs and demands and inconveniences. An aging parent who was becoming more trouble than she was worth. The fourth incident was the one that planted the seed for my elaborate deception. The one that made me realize that their indifference wasn't temporary or situational. It was fundamental. I'd been hospitalized for 3 days with pneumonia in February. Serious enough that my doctor insisted I not be alone for at least a week afterward. Hospital-acquired pneumonia kills a significant percentage of elderly patients, and Dr. Patterson wanted someone checking on me regularly, making sure I was eating, taking my medications, watching for signs of relapse. I called Michael from my hospital bed, explained the situation and asked if I could stay with them for a few days while I recovered. "A week?" he said, and I could picture him running calculations in his head. "Mom, I can't take time off work to babysit you. And Cheryl's got her book club and the boys have soccer practice and piano lessons. Our schedule is completely packed. Babysit." Like caring for his recovering mother was the same as watching someone else's children for pocket money. "I wouldn't need babysitting," I said. "Just a place to sleep and maybe help with meals." "But what if you get worse? What if we have to rush you back to the hospital?" "I don't want that responsibility." He didn't want the responsibility of caring for the woman who'd taken responsibility for him for 18 years. Of helping the person who'd sacrificed her body, her career, her dreams to give him life. "I could stay with Sarah," I suggested, though I already knew what the answer would be. "Actually, Mom, we're renovating the guest bathroom right now. Total chaos. You wouldn't be comfortable here." Renovating the guest bathroom. An excuse so flimsy it insulted my intelligence. So obviously false it was almost cruel. I hung up and stared at the hospital ceiling, listening to machines beep and realizing that the sounds were more comforting than my children's voices. At least the machines were consistent. At least they didn't pretend to care while actively rejecting me. Where did those children go? The ones who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms? The ones who begged me not to leave when they were sick? The ones who made me Mother's Day cards with their tiny handprints and promises to love me forever? When did they become these strangers? When did I become someone they endured rather than someone they loved? A nurse named Patricia came in to check my for around 3 in the morning. She was about my age, with kind eyes and gentle hands that had clearly comforted thousands of patients over the years. "No visitors today?" she asked, adjusting my blanket with the practiced care of someone who understood that dignity mattered as much as medicine. "My children are busy," I said, the lie burning my throat like acid. She nodded knowingly, in a way that told me she'd seen this scenario played out countless times before. "I have 4 children," she said quietly, checking my chart. 2 of them live within 10 miles of me. I haven't seen them since Christmas. So I wasn't alone. This epidemic of indifference wasn't unique to my family. There were others like me, other mothers whose children had grown up and moved on and forgotten that love is supposed to be a two-way street. "My daughter calls from Seattle every Sunday," Patricia continued. "Tells me about her job, asks for my recipes, wants to know about her father's side of the family for some genealogy project she's working on. Sometimes I think she loves me more from 3,000 miles away than my local children do from 3 miles away. Sometimes love isn't about proximity. Sometimes it's about intention. Sometimes it's about showing up emotionally even when you can't show up physically. Sometimes distance makes people appreciate what they have instead of taking it for granted." I was discharged on a Friday afternoon. Michael picked me up, drove me home in silence, helped me get my prescriptions from the pharmacy and walked me to my front door. "You sure you'll be okay?" he asked, already jingling his keys, already planning his escape. "I'll be fine," I lied like I'd been lying about being fine for months. "Good. Call if you need anything urgent." "Well, call if it's a real emergency. You know how crazy weekends get with the boys' activities. Call if it's a real emergency. Not if I was lonely. Not if I was scared. Not if I needed help or comfort or just the sound of my child's voice. Only if I was dying. And maybe not even then." He left me standing in my empty house, weak and dizzy and struggling to breathe properly, and drove away without looking back. That night, burning with fever and fighting for every breath, I had what I can only describe as a vision. Maybe it was the medication. Maybe it was the delirium. Maybe it was just my subconscious mind finally processing what I'd been refusing to acknowledge for months. But I saw myself dying in this house, alone, and I saw how long it would take them to find me. Days maybe. Long enough for the mail to pile up. Long enough for the neighbors to start wondering why they hadn't seen me. Long enough for my absence to become a smell rather than a worry. And I saw my funeral. Small, efficient, tasteful. Michael gave a brief eulogy about what a devoted mother I'd been, how I'd lived for my family, how I'd wanted nothing more than their happiness and success. Sarah cries at appropriate intervals, accepting condolences with gracious dignity. The grandchildren fidgeted in uncomfortable clothes, counting the minutes until they could change into jeans and get back to their video games. Then I saw the real revelation. They will read. The moment when they discovered that their patience had finally been rewarded. The relief disguised as grief. The celebration was disguised as mourning. The dividing of a lifetime like it was a church rummage sale. That's when the plan began to form. Dark and necessary and absolutely insane. If they wanted me dead so badly. If they were already living like I was gone. If they were just waiting for the inconvenience of my existence to resolve itself. Maybe it was time to show them what that actually looked like. Maybe it was time to give them exactly what they'd been waiting for. But I was going to make sure I got to see who they really were when they thought no one was watching. Because the dead see everything. And remember everything. And sometimes they come back to collect what's owed. The day I chose to die was a Tuesday in March, gray and unremarkable, which felt perfectly appropriate. My life had become a series of unremarkable days anyway, each one bleeding into the next without distinction or joy. Jake Martinez, my neighbor's 17-year-old grandson, had been coming by every few days since I'd first confided my desperate plan to him. Smart kid, good with technology and harboring his own deep resentment toward family members who took love for granted. His grandmother had died the previous year and he'd watched his relatives circle her house like vultures, more interested in her jewelry than her stories, more concerned with her will than her welfare. Mrs. Morrison, he'd said that first day when I'd broken down and told him everything, that's the most messed up thing I've ever heard. My abuela would have given anything for more time with her kids. Your children don't know how lucky they are. Lucky. When was the last time anyone had called my children lucky to have me? Jake had set everything up with the precision of a military operation. Security cameras disguised as everyday objects throughout my house. A clock on the mantle, a picture frame on the kitchen counter, a decorative vase in the living room. Audio equipment that would let me hear conversations in every room. Even a way to monitor my phone calls and text messages remotely. Technology that my children, so concerned about my well-being, had never thought to offer. Equipment that a teenager had installed in one afternoon, solving problems my adult children claimed were too complicated to address. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I'd call 911 complaining of chest pains and difficulty breathing, symptoms that any emergency responder would take seriously, especially given my age and recent medical history. Jake would intercept the ambulance, explaining that he was my neighbor's grandson, that he'd seen me collapse through the window while visiting his grandfather. The paramedics would find me unconscious but stable. At the hospital, Dr. Patterson, Patricia's nephew, who'd agreed to help after hearing my story, would carefully explain to my family that my condition was grave. That the next 24 hours would be critical. That they should prepare themselves for the possibility of saying goodbye. Then I would wait. And watch. And finally see the truth they'd been hiding behind polite concern and dutiful phone calls. The chest pains I reported to the 911 operator weren't entirely fabricated. My heart had been breaking for months, cracking a little more each time they chose convenience over connection, each time they treated my love like a burden rather than a gift. The difficulty breathing was real too. I'd been suffocating slowly in the silence of my empty house, drowning in the realization that the people I'd built my life around had already moved on without me. So in a way I really was dying. Just not the way they thought. Not the way anyone thought. Michael arrived at the hospital first, 38 minutes after the nurse called him. I watched through barely open eyes as he spoke with Dr. Patterson, his face arranged in an expression of appropriate concern while his fingers drummed impatiently against his leg. "How serious is it?" he asked, and I held my breath, waiting for the follow-up question about my pain, my comfort, my chances for recovery. "How long are we looking at here?" he continued instead. "Not how long I have with her. How long until this is over? How long until he could get back to his real life?" "The next 24 hours will tell us a lot," Dr. Patterson said carefully, playing his part perfectly. "These situations can change quickly. You should probably call your sister." Michael nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Should I bring the boys to see her? I mean if she's..." He trailed off, unable or unwilling to say the word, dying out loud. That's up to you, Dr. Patterson replied. Some families find it comforting. Others prefer to remember their loved ones as they were. Remember me as I was. Already talking about me in the past tense. Already moving from present grief to historical memory. I'll talk to Cheryl, Michael said. See what she thinks. They have school tomorrow and Tommy has a tournament this weekend. A tournament. More important than saying goodbye to their grandmother. More pressing than being present for what might be my final hours. Sarah arrived 90 minutes later, breathless and clutching her purse like a lifeline. She hugged Michael with genuine emotion. The first real feeling I'd seen from either of them in months. How is she? She whispered, looking toward my bed with what might have been actual concern. The same, Michael replied. Unconscious. They don't know if she's going to wake up. If I was going to wake up. Not when. Already accepting the possibility that I might not. Already making peace with my potential death. Has she said anything? Any last words or? She's been unconscious since they brought her in, Michael said. The doctor thinks she might be able to hear us, though. They approached my bed slowly, like people visiting a museum exhibit rather than their dying mother. Sarah reached out tentatively and touched my hand, the first physical contact she'd initiated in months. Mom, she said softly. Mom, if you can hear me, we're here. We're here. Finally. Now that it was too late to matter. Now that their presence was a farewell rather than a reunion. She looks peaceful, Cheryl said when she arrived with the boys an hour later. Like she's just sleeping. Peaceful. Because unconsciousness was the only way I could achieve peace in their presence anymore. Because the only time they found me tolerable was when I couldn't speak, couldn't ask for anything, couldn't remind them of their obligations. The boys stood awkwardly by the door, clearly uncomfortable with the medical setting, the serious faces of the adults, and the prospect of death in their young lives. Grammy's going to heaven to be with Grandpa, Cheryl explained to them in the tone you'd use to discuss a change in weekend plans. How long is this going to take? 12-year-old Tommy asked, earning a sharp look from his mother. How long is this going to take? How long until they could go home? How long until normal life resumed? How long until I stopped being an inconvenience? We don't know, sweetheart, Cheryl said. These things happen when they happen. These things. My death was these things. My life ending was just another item on their schedule. Another obligation to be managed and completed. David arrived with Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter, who immediately burst into tears upon seeing me surrounded by machines and monitors. Is Nana going to be okay? She sobbed, and for the first time since this charade began, I felt genuine guilt about what I was putting her through. Emma was the only one who seemed genuinely devastated. The only one whose tears felt real rather than performative. The only one who was grieving the potential loss of a relationship rather than celebrating the end of a responsibility. Oh, sweetheart, Sarah said, pulling her daughter close. Nana's very sick. Sometimes when people get older, their bodies just stop working properly. Stop working properly. Like I was a broken appliance. Like my potential death was a mechanical failure rather than a human tragedy. But she's not that old, Emma protested. Mrs. Chin next door is older than Nana and she still drives and everything. She's not that old. Out of the mouths of babes. The truth that everyone else was carefully avoiding. I wasn't dying of old age. I was dying of heartbreak. I was dying of neglect. I was dying of the slow poison of being unloved by the people who were supposed to love me most. The conversations continued around my supposedly unconscious body. Logistics and arrangements and practical concerns that revealed everything I needed to know about how they really felt. Who would handle the funeral arrangements? Who would clean out the house? Who would take what? How to divide up a lifetime efficiently and fairly. They were already planning my memorial while I lay dying 10 feet away. Already discussing my possessions while my body was still warm. Already moving forward into a future that didn't include me. The cruelest moment came when Dr. Patterson stepped out to consult with specialists, leaving my family alone with what they believed was my dying body. This is probably for the best, Michael said quietly, speaking words that would haunt me for the rest of my actual life. She's been so lost since Dad died. So needy and demanding. I think she would have hated being one of those elderly people who become a burden on their children. A burden. That's what I'd become. That's how my firstborn thought of me. A burden that death would mercifully lift from his shoulders. She seemed so desperate for attention lately, Sarah agreed. Calling all the time, always needing something. I feel bad that we weren't more patient with her, but honestly, it was exhausting. Exhausting. My need for connection was exhausting. My desire for love was tiresome. My basic human requirement for family contact was a drain on their energy. At least she won't suffer, Cheryl added. At least it's happening quickly while she's unconscious. That's a blessing, really. A blessing. My death was a blessing. Not a tragedy. Not a loss. A relief disguised as mercy. That's when I knew. This wasn't grief I was witnessing. This wasn't the desperate sorrow of children watching their mother die. This was liberation. This was freedom. This was the answer to prayers they'd been too ashamed to voice. They wanted me gone. And now, finally, their wish was coming true. Time to show them exactly what they'd lost. Time to teach them the difference between getting what you want and getting what you deserve. 3 hours later, Dr. Patterson returned with the news that my condition had deteriorated. That my family should prepare themselves. That the end was likely imminent. The relief on their faces was unmistakable. Finally, it was almost over. Their vigil was almost complete. Their obligation was almost fulfilled. Within 20 minutes, the monitors showed flatline. Dr. Patterson called the time of death at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, with my entire family gathered around my supposedly lifeless body. Michael hugged Sarah, and for the first time in my presence they seemed genuinely close. United in their freedom from me. Bonded by their shared relief that the difficult chapter of caring for an aging parent was finally closed. She's at peace now, Sarah whispered. She's with Dad, Michael replied. She wouldn't have wanted to be a burden, Cheryl added. Perfect justifications for perfect relief. Beautiful words to disguise ugly feelings. Appropriate grief performed for an audience of hospital staff and traumatized granddaughter. They made arrangements quickly and efficiently. Funeral home contacted me. Services scheduled. Obituary written with remarkable speed for people supposedly devastated by sudden loss. They were very good at managing death. Much better than they'd ever been at managing life. Jake picked me up from the hospital loading dock 3 hours later, wrapped in a blanket and giddy with the terrible knowledge I'd gained. We drove to his grandfather's house, where I'd be staying until the funeral, watching my family's true nature unfold through the cameras and microphones we'd installed. The next 72 hours taught me everything I needed to know about who my children really were. Everything I'd been afraid to see when they thought I was watching. Everything they'd hidden behind dutiful phone calls and obligatory visits. The funeral was exactly what I'd envisioned and worse. 43 people attended. In a life that had touched hundreds. Students I'd taught in Sunday school, neighbors I'd helped through crises, friends I'd supported through decades of marriage and child-rearing and loss. 43 people thought I was worth an hour of their time on a Wednesday afternoon. Most of them were Richard's friends and colleagues. Most of them looked confused about why they were there. Most of them left immediately after the service. Michael gave the eulogy, standing at the same pulpit where I'd listened to countless sermons about love and forgiveness and Christian duty. He spoke beautifully about my devotion to family, my sacrifices, my unwavering love for my children and grandchildren. She lived for us, he said, his voice carrying just the right note of grief-stricken admiration. Everything she did was for her family. Her children were her whole world. She lived for us. Past tense. Like my love was something that had happened to them rather than something they'd participated in. Like my devotion was a historical fact rather than a living, breathing relationship they'd chosen to abandon. Sarah read a poem about mothers and angels, her voice breaking in all the right places. She looked appropriately devastated, appropriately grateful for the outpouring of sympathy from acquaintances who remembered me more fondly than my own children did. She was performing grief better than she'd ever performed love. More convincingly than she'd ever performed affection. More passionately than she'd ever performed gratitude. Emma was the only one who cried real tears. The only one whose sorrow seemed genuine rather than theatrical. The only one who seemed to understand that death is supposed to be devastating, not liberating. My 12-year-old granddaughter was the only person at my funeral who actually missed me. The only one who grieved the loss of our relationship rather than celebrating the end of their obligation. The only one who seemed to understand that I was a person, not just a problem. After the service, I followed them to the cemetery from a distance. watching them lower an empty casket into the ground next to Richard's grave. Watching them throw flowers onto wood that contained nothing but air and their assumptions about my character. Michael and Sarah lingered longest. Not out of grief but out of performance, making sure they looked like devoted children to the handful of people still watching. Ensuring their reputations as loving family members remained intact. The real revelation came at the house afterward. I sat in Jake's car across the street, watching through the cameras we'd installed as my family transformed from mourners to scavengers in the time it took to drive from cemetery to living room. 2 hours. That's how long they maintained the pretense of grief. That's how long my memory was worth before they got down to the business of dividing my life. Okay, Michael said, standing in my living room with a legal pad and pen, looking like a general organizing a military campaign. Let's be systematic about this. We want to be fair and we want to be efficient. Mom would have wanted us to handle this properly. Mom would have wanted to. Like they'd ever cared what I wanted when I was alive to express preferences. Like they'd ever asked my opinion about anything that mattered. Like my wishes had ever influenced their decisions about anything. They went through my house like professional estate sale organizers. Room by room, item by item, 47 years of marriage and motherhood reduced to a division of assets. I'll take the dining room set, Sarah announced, running her hands over the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where she'd done homework while I cooked dinner, where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday and achievement of her childhood. What about the matching china cabinet? Cheryl asked, examining the craftsmanship with the eye of someone calculating resale value. The china cabinet my grandmother had given me as a wedding present. The one I'd promised would go to Emma someday. The one that held dishes used for every special occasion in my children's lives. Reduced to a piece of furniture that would match their kitchen. Michael found my jewelry box, the wooden one Richard had crafted by hand for our 20th anniversary. He opened it like a pirate discovering treasure, pulling out pieces and examining them under the light. This necklace is worth decent money, he said, holding up the pearls I'd worn to his wedding, to Sarah's graduation, to every important event in our family's history. We should get it appraised before we decide anything. Get it appraised. Not give it to Emma as I'd always planned. Not keep it as a memento of the woman who'd worn it to celebrate their accomplishments. Sell it for cash to pay for their children's music lessons or their own vacation plans. They found my recipe collection, hundreds of handwritten cards representing decades of perfecting dishes for family gatherings. Notes about which grandchild preferred what modifications I'd made over the years. Secrets passed down from my own mother and grandmother. Does anyone want these? Sarah asked, holding up my entire culinary legacy like it was outdated magazines. Silence. Nobody wanted the recipes. Nobody wanted to cook the foods that had brought our family together. Nobody wanted to preserve the traditions I'd spent my life creating and maintaining. Nobody saw value in the knowledge that had fed and nourished them for decades. They found my photo albums and flipped through them quickly, pulling out pictures they wanted and leaving the rest scattered across the coffee table like discarded mail. 40 years of documenting our family. 40 years of capturing love and growth and connection. 40 years of evidence that we'd once been happy together. Sorted through and discarded in 20 minutes. But the moment that sealed my decision permanently came when they discovered my journal. Not the hidden one where I documented their neglect and recorded their cruelties. That one was safely stored in Jake's grandfather's house. This was my everyday journal, the one where I'd written about my loneliness since Richard's death, my desperate attempts to stay connected to their lives, my fears about aging alone. Michael read from it aloud, sharing my most private thoughts with the amusement of someone reading a particularly entertaining gossip column. Listen to this entry from January, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Called Sarah today but got her voicemail again. I hope I'm not bothering her too much with my calls. Maybe I should wait for her to call me instead. I don't want to be one of those needy mothers. They were laughing. At my loneliness. In my desperation to be loved. At my pathetic attempts to maintain connection with people who'd already disconnected from me. God, she was so needy toward the end, Sarah said, shaking her head with the exasperated affection you'd show toward a difficult pet. All those phone calls and requests for visits. I actually feel bad that we weren't more patient with her. Feel bad. Past tense. Too late. Regret without responsibility. Guilt without commitment to change. She just got so clingy after Dad died, Michael agreed. I mean, I understand she was grieving, but it was like she expected us to be her entertainment or something. Entertainment. That's what they thought I wanted from them. Not love. No connection. Not the basic human comfort of family contact. Entertainment. Like I was bored rather than heartbroken. Like I was demanding rather than desperately lonely. That's when I knew it was time to make my entrance. Time to show them what they'd really lost. Time to teach them the difference between a burden and a blessing. Time to demonstrate that ghosts aren't always dead people. Sometimes they're just living people who've been forgotten. I walked across the street, up the front steps of my own house, through the door of the home where I'd supposedly died 3 days earlier. The house where they were dividing my life like spoils of war. The house where they were erasing my existence one possession at a time. The house where they were celebrating their freedom from the woman who'd given them everything. I stood in the doorway of my living room, cleared my throat, and waited for them to notice that their burden had returned. The silence that followed was worth every moment of planning. The looks on their faces were priceless. The truth was finally, completely, devastatingly clear. "Hello," I said calmly, my voice cutting through their shock like a knife through silk. "Don't mind me. I'm just a ghost, here to collect some things you seem to have forgotten belong to me." Michael dropped my jewelry box. Pearls scattered across the hardwood floor like tears. Sarah screamed. Cheryl fainted. The children ran. And I smiled for the first time in months. "Surprise," I said, stepping into my own living room like I owned the place, which I did. "I'm not dead. But apparently you've been dead to me for quite some time. I just needed to see it for myself. Because sometimes, the only way to come back to life is to first discover what it feels like to be truly dead. And sometimes, the only way to find your real family is to lose your fake one completely. And sometimes, the only way to know who really loves you is to give them the chance to prove they don't." Mission accomplished. 6 months later, I'm living in a cozy apartment across town, in a building designed for active seniors who want independence from the community. It's everything my old house wasn't, full of laughter, conversation, genuine friendship, and people who see my presence as a gift rather than a burden. My apartment has 2 bedrooms, a small balcony where I grow tomatoes and herbs, and neighbors who knock on my door to invite me for coffee, not because they feel obligated but because they enjoy my company. We play cards on Thursday evenings, take turns cooking dinner for the group, and share stories about our lives without judgment or impatience. I've learned that a chosen family can be stronger than a blood family. That people who want you around are infinitely better company than people who feel they should want you around. That love freely given is worth more than duty grudgingly performed. Jake visits every Sunday. We've become unlikely best friends, this 17-year-old tech genius and this 67-year-old woman who faked her death for truth. He calls me his honorary grandmother and I call him my honorary grandson. He's teaching me to use a smartphone and I'm teaching him to make bread from scratch. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Sometimes angels come in the form of teenagers with purple hair and hearts bigger than their own families deserve. Emma visits too when Sarah isn't monitoring her schedule. She brings friends sometimes, eager to show off the grandmother who came back from the dead. She asks me to teach her the recipes her mother threw away, wants to hear stories about when her mom was little, and begs me to explain why families sometimes fall apart. Some relationships survive truth-telling. Some love is strong enough to weather revelation. Some connections are built on genuine affection rather than obligation. Emma's is one of them. Michael and Sarah tried to reach out after the initial shock wore off. First came anger. How could I put them through that? How could I embarrass them like that? How could I lie to them, deceive them, make them grieve for someone who wasn't actually dead? The irony was completely lost on them. They were outraged at my deception while remaining oblivious to their own. They were furious about my dishonesty while ignoring years of their own emotional fraud. Then came the guilt phase, which lasted several weeks and involved multiple attempts to explain, justify, and make me understand how busy they'd been, how stressed, how they'd always meant to be better children but life just got in the way. Life got in the way. Like love was supposed to be convenient. Like relationships were supposed to be effortless. Like I was supposed to be patient forever while they figured out how to care about me. Finally came the bargaining phase. Promises to do better, to call more often, to include me in family activities to make up for lost time. Elaborate plans for regular dinners, family vacations, holiday celebrations that would somehow erase years of neglect and indifference. I listened to their explanations and apologies and promises. I watched them perform regret with the same skill they'd once performed love. And then I told them the truth I'd learned from dying while I was still alive. You can't love someone back to life, I said during our final conversation, sitting in my new living room while they squirmed on my new couch. You can't guilt someone into caring. You can't apologize your way out of years of neglect. Some damage can't be undone. Some trust can't be rebuilt. Some people only miss you when you're gone, and even then they miss the idea of you more than the reality. Some relationships die long before anyone has the decency to bury them. I'm not bitter anymore, though I was for a while. Bitterness is just disappointment that's been marinating too long in hurt and resentment, and I decided to stop being disappointed by people who'd shown me exactly who they were. I'm grateful now. Grateful for the lesson. Grateful for the freedom. Grateful for the chance to rebuild my life around people who actually want me in it. Grateful for learning that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Sometimes it's about showing up. Sometimes it's about loving someone enough to let them be themselves, even when yourself isn't convenient. The house sold within 2 weeks of going on the market. I donated most of the furniture to charity, kept only the things that brought me joy rather than obligation. Started fresh with fresh things for a fresh life in a place where my history didn't define me and my age didn't diminish me. I'm 67 years old and I'm finally learning how to live for myself. It's terrifying and liberating and absolutely necessary. It's everything I should have done years ago. My new friends don't know about my famous resurrection unless I choose to share the story. To them, I'm just Margaret, the woman who makes excellent apple pie and tells funny stories about raising children in the 70s. They don't see me as a burden or an obligation or a problem to be managed. They see me as a person. With value. With wisdom. With something to contribute to their lives. What a revolutionary concept. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're the one being taken for granted, the one whose love is treated like a given rather than a gift, the one who's slowly disappearing in your own life, I want you to know something important. You don't have to fake your death to find out who really loves you. You just have to stop being available for people who don't appreciate your availability. You just have to stop giving your time to people who waste it. You just have to stop loving people more than they love you. It's not selfish to expect reciprocity. It's not unreasonable to want your feelings considered. It's not demanding to need your love valued rather than assumed. It's survival. It's self-preservation. It's the basic human right to be treated like you matter. And if you're watching this and recognizing yourself as one of my children, if you're the one who takes love for granted, who assumes it will always be there waiting for you, who treats family like a convenience store that's always open, I want you to know something too. Love has an expiration date when it's not nourished. Relationships die when they're not tended. People give up when they're consistently given up on. And sometimes by the time you realize what you've lost, it's too late to get it back. But it's never too late to do better with the people you still have. It's never too late to love someone while they're still here to feel it. It's never too late to choose connection over convenience. It's never too late to treat family like a privilege rather than a burden. Just maybe don't wait until they're dead, or pretending to be dead, to figure that out. Because ghosts aren't the only ones who can disappear. Sometimes the living just fades away, one unreturned phone call at a time. One canceled visit at a time. One, I'm too busy at a time. Until one day they're just gone. And all you're left with is an empty house and the echo of your own excuses. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I hope this story gave you strength, or at least the feeling that you're not alone. Comment where you're watching from and maybe subscribe. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard.